President Trump has announced frameworks for agreements on reciprocal trade with El Salvador, Argentina, Ecuador, and Guatemala. Joining us right now on the latest on trade negotiations is United States Trade Representative Ambassador Jamieson Greer. And Ambassador, thank you for being here today. The way it's being boiled down, at least in the headlines, and tell us if this is the right way of seeing this, is that there are going to be exemptions to these tariff barriers that are there for goods that we can't produce in America, things like bananas, things like coffee, or maybe even things that we want to see lower prices on, like beef. Is that the fair way to frame it?
Yeah, I mean, listen, since the outset on April 2nd, when the president announced his reciprocal tariff program, on April 2nd itself, there were some items that weren't subject to tariffs. And then in early September, the president put out a notice to the world saying, as I start to conclude these deals, we're going to let out tariffs on some of these things that we don't make in the United States. And so this is just following through on that promise. He's made the deals now. In addition to these 4 Latin American allies, we have deals with a number of Asian allies, also the UK and the EU. We have a critical mass, and so the president's determined, now that we have this in place, we have these deals in hand, it's time to take off some of these tariffs on products we don't make here.
The Democrats did very well in the elections a couple of weeks ago in New York City, New Jersey, Virginia, and there are some people who say that this is the administration's focus on more affordability, because that affordability catchphrase is something that the Democrats have been trying to play up and make political hay with. Is that true?
Well, I mean, the reality is, at a macro level, the president's trade program has been incredibly successful. We've opened up markets for our exporters. We're reining in the trade deficit. Are there micro areas, like bananas or coffee or cocoa or things like that, where we don't need a tariff? I think that's right. The president appropriately used them as leverage to get these deals. I mean, Ecuador, that's a country. What do they export to us? A lot of bananas, coffee, things like that. Some of these other countries. So it makes sense when you're making a deal and giving tariff relief. It's mutually beneficial for them and for us. So the timing is right.
I guess my question would be more pointedly, though. The president himself has said that while these are goals that we want to increase production in the United States in areas where we can, we may have to live with higher costs for a short time. I think his comment at one point was maybe for Christmas you get one toy, one Barbie doll instead of 2 or 3. Is that still the mindset of the administration, that, look, these could be painful in the short term, but these are goals that long term really matter, and we're focused on that?
Well, when you're adjusting supply chains, companies always, have some reallocation of costs, and they don't like that. When we look at prices overall this year, prices generally are in check. And like I said, I think there are, kind of these micro areas, edge cases, and some of them are things at the grocery store, right? But a lot of these things are healthcare or housing or education, things that have nothing to do with the import or export of goods. So, I mean, I don't think we want to have super cheap stuff from Asia that undermines our own manufacturing. But at the same time, we haven't seen a huge increase in some of those kinds of goods. So I think you have to go product by product, really, in these kinds of cases.
I know you are headed to London later this month to work on trade and tariff issues with the UK. Is that the next in line? Is it Switzerland? Where do things kind of stand in terms of the who's on deck?
Sure. So Switzerland is probably the next one. I just met with them yesterday afternoon. I've spoken with the president just this morning and yesterday. I've coordinated with cabinet colleagues, Secretary Ludnick, Secretary Besson, the Chief of Staff. And this is something where we've essentially reached a deal with Switzerland. So we'll post details of that today on the White House website, where they're going to send a lot of their manufacturing here to the United States, pharmaceuticals, gold smelting, railway equipment. So we're really excited about that deal and what it means for American manufacturing.
How long was that deal in the works, and what kind of pushed it over the top?
Well, it's really been in the works since April, when the president started his reciprocal trade program. Switzerland, like dozens of other countries, have been extremely interested in having market opening deals with the United States, where they open their markets to us and we modify the reciprocal tariff somewhat for them. Like all of the president's deals, we keep a tariff. We retain a tariff on these countries because we have to get the trade deficit under control. But because Switzerland, for example, has agreed to manage its trade surplus with the United States in terms of making sure that things where they have a surplus with us, pharmaceuticals, gold, et cetera, their companies are going to build here, so it's going to eliminate some of the sources of that surplus. I mean, we've already seen, Roche has actually broken ground already for a pharmaceutical facility in the United States. That's really exciting.
Ambassador, there's a lot of conversation about affordability. That seems to be the buzzword of the moment. Apparently, it was discussed with the president and some CEOs just a couple of days ago at the White House. I'm curious, when you think about some of the tariffs that have now been lowered on countries that export things like bananas and coffee and the like, whether that's an acknowledgement to any degree that tariffs have raised costs to American consumers.
Well, it depends. It depends what the importers do with the tariff. Our assessment, and frankly, my experience as a trade attorney out in the private sector, is that when you impose a tariff, it ends up getting allocated along the supply chain. And the more foreign producers and suppliers you have, the more they eat that tariff because they want to compete to keep market share in the United States. If you're in a situation where you have a sole source provider overseas, then they're more likely to pass it along. I've been in contact with a lot of the U.S. companies that process or use things like coffee or cocoa or bananas or things like that. And they've said, listen, we've had some secular price increases over the past 2 years because of weather events in Brazil or other places like that. So when you look at the overall price trend, it hasn't been because of tariff. It's been because of these other events going on and just supply and demand. Now, if the tariff has been passed along to the consumer by these retailers, and a lot of them I think have withheld it, at least that's what they've told me, we expect that any price savings will go along to the consumer. I mean, that is the expectation. But then so we'll see what happens.
What was the rationale then for shifting the tariff prices for countries like Guatemala, for example, or some of the other countries where bananas and coffee and other things were coming in? I thought it was to make it more affordable for Americans, which to some degree is an acknowledgement that the tariffs raise prices on items like that.
Well, every trade deal has concessions on both sides, right? And so our concession to Ecuador and a lot of the other countries we're negotiating with right now, who are close to deals but not quite there, is to make sure that they can send us things that we can't make. It coincides with the concessions they're making to us to open their markets to American poultry, pork, beef, industrial goods, et cetera, our services companies. So this is part of the normal push and pull, but also coincides with the president's commitment in September that he was going to remove tariffs on some of these hard-to-find items, or items we can't grow in the U.S. just due to the climate. I mean, it's something he's signaled for the past 2 months, and now we have a critical mass of agreements with countries who make this stuff. So this is good timing.